I'm with Michael Kronish, who is the EVP of Viceland Studios, and they had a MIP TV debut of a project called Abandoned. Michael, good to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Tell me a little bit about Abandoned. I've seen some of the imagery around it. It looks like a very, very cool idea for a documentary series.
Yeah, sure. So it's actually one of my favorite shows that we made this year at Vice Studios.
Mm-hmm.
It is a 10 one-hour series. Kind of conceived of and produced by Rick McCrank, who's the host and one of the producers, as well as David Galloway and Alex Craig, who are the filmmakers. And basically they came to us with this idea to go around North America and look at places where people had been and are in the process of leaving or have completely left, and to look at the stories of the people who are left behind.
Crazy. So he's a skater, and we see skating images here. So does he go and skate these abandoned, arenas or factories and stuff? Is that kind of what he does?
So there's definitely a lot of skating in the show.
Yeah.
Rick McCrank is a sort of a legendary skateboarder. So he, part of the conduit is that yes, there is this idea that like skaters will find places where people have left and reappropriate them as playgrounds for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So he does hook up usually with young people who are from the communities, and he sort of immerses themselves into their lives, and they themselves have taken over these spaces and used them, turned them into skate playgrounds.
That's amazing. And so from there, though, he also dives into the history of each of these facilities. What are some of these places that we discover in the first season?
Yeah, so that's exactly what he does. Some of the shows are everything from Newfoundland cod fishing villages that have basically disappeared and had to have been relocated because, as he says in the show, like we fished all the fish and there's no more fish, so there's no more industry, so people have no more jobs, so they literally have to move everyone away, and what's left behind are a few hangers-on who just don't want to leave, and the buildings, the houses, the old school, the old church. So that's a sort of a good example. Other shows that we've done have been like Midwestern shopping malls. So the economies have changed very dramatically in the Midwest and of the U.S. And so you've got like these mega malls that were built 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago that just have been completely abandoned. Another really interesting example is you take a city like St. Louis, which used to have a population of a couple of million people, and because of the way things have gone in the economy, there's basically been a massive reduction in the population of a city, which has left, I think, 15 or 20 public schools just abandoned. So think of these mega schools that were built in the 50s that would be, housing 1,000 kids, hundreds of teachers, and they're just these beautiful old buildings left to just rot. And so they get taken over by kids skating. He goes in. It's urban exploration, but it's also really sort of a story about the dangers of like not thinking out urban planning or just planning for the earth
Right.
in a long-term way, and really thinking of the short term and what happens when you've only thought about things in a relatively short period of time, and then what do you do?
So, I mean, we live in this sort of post-apocalyptic, obsessed world right now where shows like The Walking Dead go on for multiple seasons. This is almost like, kind of a real-world mirror reflection of some of that, right? Where all of these abandoned places out there.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a wake-up call, a cry for people to wake up in the show. I know that it was like emotionally a very profound show for the filmmakers to make, and they took it very seriously. They really didn't want the show to be about parachuting into a community that had been like potentially destroyed by whatever it was, the environment, progress, changing economies, and to dive in, shoot a bunch of interviews, get some beauty shots, and then get out.
Yeah.
So they really did as much as they possibly could within a production sense, spend time with people there, really try to get to understand them, to know them, to ingratiate themselves, and to I think take a positive look at who these people are. And like I think a good example would be, we did an episode on Detroit, which is probably the most stunning example of a city that was at one time a very vibrant car manufacturing kind of built on Ford and all the companies, and
global city.
and has just really been hit hard over the last 25 years. And instead of going in there and just being sort of negative and just showing the destruction, they actually came out with a show that looked at Detroit like of the future and where it's going to go, and all the potential. That's and awesome. The incredible people that are there that are building up a vision of a new city, which will do different things. And that was, I think, one of the most beautiful kind of points of the show, is to say that it just doesn't have to be about just death and destruction and the sort of a post-apocalyptic vision of the world, but to say we can do things about this.
And what can we learn, right? For the future, right?
Yeah.
Don't overbuild, and don't just sort of assume that this stuff is permanent, I guess.
Yeah, there's I think a quote from one of the guys who's credited as being kind of the godfather of the concept of the modern shopping mall.
Yeah.
And he, in one of the episodes, and he talks about how he deeply regretted his designs, because he never intended for what became of these mega malls, and that wasn't the point. And he would have been rolling in his grave if he had seen what society had done with these things, and what the ramifications are of having these structures in our cities and our towns and our suburbs.
What an awesome idea for a show. Now, this is already aired in Canada and the States,
Yeah.
and you're here at MIP and Con to kind of sell it around the world and get more broadcasters and more people involved with this. But how can people that are in Canada, the States, or places where it's already aired, how can they watch it now?
So it's on, or will be on, the various Viceland networks, which include Canada, the US, Australia, France, UK, and there'll be more coming in the very near future. Also on our various digital platforms, so if you're a subscriber in those countries, you can get it digitally. I believe it's available on platforms like iTunes, and we try to make clips and sometimes episodes available just on YouTube for free, to get people to get a taste of it. And it's being distributed by A&E, so they will take care of foreign sales. And so that is a way for markets that don't have Viceland channels to pick it up.
It's an interesting world we live in now, isn't it, where you can carve it up in a million different ways. What typifies a Vice show? Do you guys kind of sort of verbalize that or vocalize that? Like, how do you know that a project is right for your network?
Well, I think it's a good question. We're always looking for projects or stories that are underreported or have a different angle. A lot of our shows are host-driven, so there's a very strong point of view. We're looking for really a unique perspective, a unique personality to the shows, and that is very helpful to drive it. So Rick, for example, who hosts Abandon, is not an expert. He's not an urban planning expert. He's just a guy who is interested in asking questions of people and sort of putting together a story. But he doesn't go in there as an authority figure looking down on people, or looking up at them and sort of giving them undue praise. Like, I think he looks people in the eye, and for me, he's sort of a classically perfect kind of Vice personality, because he brings no judgment to the table. He just brings some questions and some empathy, and that for me personally is what I always aim for when I'm looking at when we're doing casting for these shows.
Well, I can't wait to check out Abandon, and terrific to meet you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Looking forward to our next conversation about the next cool thing you guys are working on.